All right, I just want to state for the record here that some of you won't like what I have to say and will disagree with me no matter what I say. This is likely going to be true of our coaching friends who, for some reason, keep listening to this podcast. Still, this is just my take on the topic, and we're allowed to disagree with each other. This is the Swim Coach Dad podcast. Welcome back.
I go swimming in the water, swimming in the river, swimming in the sea. I go swimming in the water, swimming in the pool, swimming is cool. I go swimming.
All right, welcome back to the Swim Coach Dad podcast. Sorry this is a bit late, but as I was writing the script, I decided to make some changes. This started out being about a podcast about training, and so when I named it, I just want to sprint and other training myths. I pictured talking about training, why we train the way we do, and then I realized in order to cover that, I need to talk about why everyone can't be sprinters if they want to be. So I thought I would break this up into two podcasts, one covering sprinting, one covering training after that. So this is the first part of that. First, let's recognize that some swimmers simply want to do the events they like, regardless of whether they are suited for those events. And as coaches, we get that. There are kids that they want to do what they want to do, and you know, we do what we can do with them too. Keep in mind, as coaches, we try to develop swimmers to swim a series of events that they're best suited for physically, and we'll cover some of what that means later. This podcast is going to go along with the podcast about our training philosophy at Victor Swim Club and how we develop athletes for a range of events that they're best suited for. So this is just some background. We've had some swimmers tell us, I just want to sprint. I don't need to swim that much. We do too much distance work, all that stuff. But what does it mean to just sprint? So let's just cover what it takes to be successful in those events. There's more to sprinting than just how you train. We've trained sprinters who have the attributes, and we're sprinters. I've also trained in my career kids as swimmers that they still didn't go, super fast because they just lacked some of the physical ability. But that's what they wanted to do, so I kind of worked them into my workout plans and had them swim that way. The first part, let's cover some what it takes genetically. My wife and I are both we were distance or mid-distance swimmers when we were younger and in college. We both tried to sprint, but honestly, we weren't built for it and didn't have the quickness for it. Even with my size, I was probably one of the largest distance swimmers in the conference, but that didn't mean I could sprint because I just didn't have the musculature to do really well at that. So when our children started swimming, they had a lot of the same physical attributes, including muscle type and some of the other neurological things that needed to be, quick athletes. And so both turned into mid-distance and distance athletes or distance events when they developed. They both still worked on sprints, but mostly to get front-end speed in the distance and mid-distance events. And also they both swam, shorter, like 200 back, 200 fly type things. So there is a genetic component in there that you can't get around. So there are a couple of times when I was able to see a contrast in physical qualities of sprinters, and there are a couple of stories here that I wanted to tell just because it really does show the two different sides of this. The first one is at Speedo Sectionals at ECC a few years ago. I think it was like 2016. It had to be because I think it was an Olympic year because we were swimming long course in March. The main contenders in the men's 50 free final were a guy named Drew Modroff and the other guy is Wyatt Ubelacker. And Drew, he was probably about 6'2", but he really looked small next to Wyatt. I mean, he looked short next to Wyatt, who's 6'6", probably, or maybe even a little bit bigger than that. And both were powerfully built. I mean, these were large guys. And walking among all those guys in the finals, I really kind of felt small walking around them. And to see them swim the 50 especially was amazing because the power that they could generate, and especially Drew, who could get 6'2", 6'3" off the blocks that fast and that up and get up and swim that quickly was pretty amazing. On the other hand, I remember, this was quite a while ago, 2014 maybe. I was at Speedo Sectionals at super sectionals. That's a summer meet that we had at one point. It was long course meters, and it was at ECC in July. I was watching two of the smallest guys. It was always fun to watch the different contrasts, because especially the short guys in the 50 free. But I was watching two guys in the finals: Quinn Smith, who's from the Albany area, and then Justin Plashka, who's from downstate, another New York guy. They're getting ready to swim the final of the 50 free. I think Justin's probably 5'9", maybe. Even now, he's probably only 5'9" and maybe 150 pounds. So small, and really small compared to Drew and Wyatt from before. And Quinn is maybe a little bit shorter at 5'8". So now you can see how short that is in comparison. But both were jumping behind the blocks, and you couldn't help but notice the height they were both getting when they were jumping. It was really amazing. It was probably at least 30 inches of vertical. You could see the athleticism in both of them, just because they could, spring up there so quickly and generate so much power out of their legs. So, and that's really how they were both able to be competitive, because, they weren't tall. So I think that race, Justin probably won, and I think Quinn was something like fourth, but it was really close. Both went on to really successful careers. Justin a little bit more successful, and he was at Notre Dame. I think he went 19-3 in the 50 at ACCs. He was probably top 3 or 4 at the meet. And then Quinn swam at Boston University, but he swam the 200 IM, 100 fly, and 100 free mostly. But that's also a lesson in that you swim where you're needed in college in a lot of cases, and he just happened to have a few more events up his sleeve. To show some of what it takes to be a successful swimmer, at least in size-wise, let's do a little comparing here. The 2019 NCAA Division I Women's Championships, the finals of the 50 free, the women were 5'10", 5'7", 5'9", 5'5", and that's really an anomaly. That's really I think any other year I would probably see probably no one under 5'9". 6'2", 5'10", and 6 feet. So there's some pretty tall women in that group. And then in men's, the same year, the men were 6'3", 6 foot, 6'2", 6'2", 6'6", 6'6", 6'3", and 6'5". So, big people in that. But that doesn't mean you can't obviously sprint, because Justin Plashka had a great year, had a great career too. And 19.3 isn't anything to sneeze at. So what does it mean to train like a sprinter? To most of the guys I've talked to, at least the guys are the ones that give me the hardest time about this. Most of the guys I've talked to as a coach, it seems to mean you warm up for a while, you swim a few fast 50s, and you kind of cool down and call it a day. And this is where the myth of sprinting kind of starts. In my time, really good sprinters that I've worked with, and some are world-class, legitimately world-class, they train long and they train hard, and they are really putting everything into it. If they're working on swimming faster, gaining power, working on their endurance, so they aren't 35 freestylers or 75 freestylers, they're working on stroke technique and squeezing as much as they can out of each pull. They're working on starts, turns, transitions, kicking, timing, every tiny point there where they can cut some time. I was at the Michigan swim camp, and I got a chance to work with some of the guys, the pros working with Club Wolverine and the sprinters. And one of the guys who was a world-class swimmer, he was a finalist in the Olympics and really quite a talented athlete. He would go back over and over his start and ask me if he was dragging his feet at all on the start. I mean, he was really getting down to that meticulous time. Finally, the coach told him basically he needed to go cool down because he was cooked. He couldn't do it right because his legs were so tired from doing so many starts. So they do a lot of time. They spend a lot of time on stuff like that, and they really focus on being quicker and being more powerful. They also put in ridiculous weight and dryland workouts. And anybody that's ever seen a college program, the distance swimmers, if they lift pretty lightly, and because most of the distance coaches that I've talked to, they want their distance swimmers skinny. And but the sprinters are really doing a lot of weight work on a lot of dryland workouts. At Michigan again, I remember seeing the guys really go at the dryland workouts and just building specific power and specific strength so they could go faster, so they could generate more power in the water. Back in my day, one of my teammates, Matt Wood, is a great guy, good friend of mine still. He was Iowa's first swimmer under 20 seconds in the 50 free, and it was about 40 years ago. He did 1,500 sit-ups a day, every day. And we lived together for a good part of his college career, and every day he was cranking it out. You'd see him on the deck, doing them on the mats, doing sit-ups. Because at 5'9", he needed to be quicker and more powerful than anyone else in the pool to make up for his lack of height. He was giving away 6 inches, 7 inches on some guys, and he had to really be quick in a lot of ways. And he felt core strength was a big part of it. Sprinting these days especially is extremely competitive and takes some pretty specific skills. We've talked about size and strength and power and athleticism and quickness, and those are those are really important. But I don't want to discourage anybody who wants to be a sprinter from shying away from those events. But you should understand the standards that there are for success in those events, especially the 50 free. To show how competitive the 50 free has gotten, note that in 2018-19 college swimming season, and that's all levels, Division 1, 2, and 3, 203 men swam under 20 seconds in the 50 free. 203. In the women's side, 221 that same year were under 23 in the 50 free. So, and we've had some swimmers in our program who, weren't world beaters, or they were good swimmers, but they were in the top 100 in the country in longer events in Division 1 or in college swimming in general. So, the longer events, there's less competition. I wouldn't say less competition, because some of the competition in like the 500 free in college is ridiculous. But there's not quite the numbers in those events, especially the longer events. So let's go back to that myth that sprinters do far less yardage and train less than distance swimmers. The reality is that sprinters work just as hard and just as long as distance swimmers, and they do it in very specific ways. For those of you who think you're going to turn into a sprinter and immediately do shorter workouts, let me point out that some college programs like Michigan and others, I know that there are others that do this, have their sprinters train with the distance or mid-distance groups for a period of time before breaking off into the sprint group. So I think Michigan, they were 7 or 8 weeks that they did. They worked with a distance group, and they didn't like it, but it was also a way to give them some aerobic base so that they could put their speed and power to use and finish races. So I got the chance to in college, working at swim camp, to work with a young man named Tom Jager, who ultimately became a 5-time Olympic gold medalist. But I worked with him when he was younger. He was like probably 13 or 14. His sister went to college with me, and so he went to swim camp, and that was a training camp in those days. It was before a lot of the rules, so we did a lot of training. At that time, he was a 1650 and 500 free swimmer, because he was this little skinny guy and hadn't developed any real musculature or anything when he was 14. So his first successes were in the 1650 when he made juniors. I think he was probably 14 when he made the junior cut in the 1650. But then with strength and maturity and training in college, he became one of the best sprinters in the world. Now, mind you, at the time when he was a 1650 and 500 swimmer when he was younger, we knew he hated training. He came from a very training-oriented, distance-oriented program under Penny Taylor at Parkside and near St. Louis, but we knew he hated training. So he might have had the body for distance swimming, but he had the head for sprinting, even back then. So, but like I said, he became one of the best sprinters in the world in college, and then after. He kept swimming well after college. But I really have to believe that the endurance training he did when he was younger, it made him a better sprinter when he got his adult strength. These days, the 50 free is the same kind of anomaly as the 1650, and it takes specific training and limits the swimmers to that event. By training for longer events, the swimmers will have more options in college when they swim there. So I've said many times the two most useless swimmers on a team are the 1650 swimmer who can't swim anything else, and the 50 freestyler who can't swim anything longer than that. The only reason the drop dead 50 swimmer is a little bit more valuable or more useful is because of relays. But we try to avoid that as much as we can by working on aerobic capacity all the time so we can train for a range of events and to swim different strokes. We've had swimmers that drop the 500 free when they go to college. On the first day of their college championships, they have a choice, 50 free, or the 500 free first, then the 200 IM, and the 50 free. And so they swam the 50 free the first day, the 200 free the second day, and the 100 free the last day. So instead of being 500 free, 200 free, 100 free, they went 50 free, 200 free, 100 free, and it's easier to train that way too. But developing strength and power to swim the 50 is sometimes a matter of time, especially with the guys who mature physically generally later than women. As coaches, we feel our role is to help each swimmer move towards reaching his or her potential and allowing them to develop in strokes and events they're physically best suited for. We train for a range of events because at this point, our swimmers should still be exploring which events they're physically best suited for. You know, you see somebody that's 13 or 14 years old, they don't have their full strength, and we don't know what they're going to turn into, so we try and give them a range of events to work with. In a lot of cases, we could run a sprint-oriented program, and we'd have swimmers improve in those events. However, without the right physical attributes, most can only go so far in the 50 free and the shorter events with limited success. And there are plenty of programs in the area and in swimming in general that only work on events 200 free and below. However, we recognize that we don't usually have those kind of athletes with the combination of height, strength, power, body type, musculature to be successful as sprinters. We have had them, but there's a lot more that we've had that were best suited for mid-distance and distance. I know some of you want us to turn into a sprint-oriented program, and honestly, we work as a swimmer development program, where we're allowing swimmers to develop in distances and strokes that they have the most success in. You'll find the next part that we really aren't a distance program, in spite of what people seem to think. We also know that focusing on the 50 free and stretching the swimmers to 100 fly, 100 free, 100 back, even up to the 2 free and the 2 IM, is usually not doing right by the athletes we have. I know that there are some college coaches and former college coaches out there who believe everyone should be or could be a sprinter. But in my time in the sport, I've never seen a swimmer train for mid-distance and distance and at the club level who became sprinters in college that were harmed by the aerobic background that I gave them when they were younger. I've seen plenty of swimmers harmed who are limited in their training by only focusing on the 50 free or even the 100 free or even the sprints when they were younger. And they had their careers cut short because of a lack of aerobic training. They just couldn't handle the rigors of training when they were older. I'm reminded of a story of Mac, son of one of my club teammates from when I was a kid. The program he came from was totally focused on the 50 free and sprinting in terms of training yardages and practices. And he didn't have any aerobic training to speak of. I mean, he did, but not really enough, especially when he was younger. So he was New York State champion in the 50 free in high school, going 20.4 his senior year, and he was way back in the B final. I think he was probably like 15th, 16th in the 100 free, but he couldn't really swim anything else but the 50 free. And he couldn't train very long. So his college career lasted one season where he trained mostly with Finns because he couldn't keep up with the rest of the team. And he went to a serious school. He won the 50 free in his conference meet his freshman year, but he was something like 16th in the 100 free. And he contributed to relays, but he wasn't really going to develop much more in college because he simply couldn't handle the training. What he missed was learning to train when he was young and being exposed to more aerobic training, more aerobic swimming. And who knows what he could have done with more aerobic work later in his career if he had that when he was younger. So swim the 50 free and sprints if you like, but don't think that training for the sprints is easier, involves less work, and don't think that what we do is going to hurt you or doesn't have anything to do with you being successful in the sprints. So I'll be back in a little while with part 2 of this podcast, and I'll tell you a little bit about why we train the way we train, including the deep, dark, sacred secrets about our training. So until then, this is Coach Scott Wisner for the Swim Coach Dad podcast, reminding you to just keep swimming.
I go swimming. I go